Hello grade 6 and welcome to your first virtual math lesson of the year. We're starting off with a new unit, a unit on fractions. And this first lesson is going to be, well, what I'm hoping is a lot of review for you. It's kind of like the fraction basics, but still very helpful to go over before we get into more of the deeper learning about fractions. So we're just going to start with the basics for today. So just a couple of terms that you probably have heard before. Here we have a fraction. We would say that as 3/4 or 3/4. Now, the terms that we need to know is that the top number of a fraction is called the numerator, and the bottom number of a fraction is called the denominator. And the little memory trick that I like to use is the denominator is the bottom. So the D for down, or you can think of it being like downstairs, like the numerator is in the top floor, and then the denominator is downstairs, it's down below. So just a bit of a memory trick to help you keep those two words straight. Now, we use fractions in two main ways. The first thing that we use fractions is to express a part of a whole. So what I have here is a circle on the left-hand side of your screen. And for our study of fractions, I would suggest always making sure that you have eaten recently, because I'm going to be doing lots of talking about pies and pizzas and stuff like that, so you might get kind of hungry. So you can imagine here we have a whole pizza that has been split into 4 pieces. Now, if we had 3 of those pieces that are still sitting there in the pizza box, but somebody ate one of them, we could say that there are 3/4 or 3 out of 4 pieces left of that pizza. Okay, there are 3 pieces out of 4 total, which would be 3 pieces of the whole pizza that had been split into 4. All right, so for things like pizzas or pies, or sometimes we'll do chocolate bars, parts of a whole is what we're talking about. But fractions can also be used when we're talking about parts of a set or a group of things. So if you look at the right-hand side of your screen, we've got 4 separate dots here. You could think of them, they could represent really anything, but let's say that there are 4 people in a room, and 3 of them had, well, my pen is yellow, so 3 of them had yellow shirts. Okay, so 3 people out of 4 had yellow shirts. We would use the same fraction to express that. It's just representing something a little bit different. Now, instead of having parts of a whole, we're having parts of a group or parts of a set. Something else that's important to know about fractions is the term equivalent fractions. And in equivalent, you should be thinking of the word equal. Equivalent means equal. Okay, so here I have 2 pizzas, and if you look at them, the shaded blue part, we have the same amount of pizza. But for the first pizza, it's been split into 4 pieces, and we have 3 out of those 4 pieces. For the second pizza, on the other hand, we have the same amount of pizza, but this time we have 6 pieces out of 8 pieces total. We have the same amount of pizza, it's just split into more pieces, so therefore we change our fraction to reflect that. But these are still equal amounts of pizza, equivalent or equal fractions, okay? And that's easy to see when you have a picture in front of you, but there's a way to do it mathematically as well, okay? So your textbook's going to ask you to do this today. It's going to give you a fraction, and it's going to ask you to find an equivalent fraction. And there are 2 ways that you can find an equivalent fraction. You can do it either with multiplication or with division. All right, so we're going to take our 6/8 and let's start with multiplication. It's always easier to find one with multiplication because you can really just pick any number you want and multiply to create an equivalent fraction. So let's take a nice easy number. Let's go with 2. Okay, so if I take my fraction 6/8 and I multiply the numerator and the denominator, the top and the bottom, by 2, what I end up with is an equivalent fraction. Okay, so 6/8 is the same, it's equivalent or equal to 12 12/16. Very, very simple to do. The main thing that you have to remember is that if you're multiplying the numerator, you have to multiply the denominator as well, and the other way around. If you would multiply the denominator, you would have to multiply the numerator in order for it to be equivalent. Now, with 6/8, there's another thing that we can do to create an equivalent fraction. You can actually divide 6/8. Okay, so I am able to divide 6 and 8 by 2. So if I do 6 divided by 2 and 6 divided by 8, 8 divided by 2, sorry, make sure I'm clear here, we end up with 3/4. Okay, so once again, doing the same thing to the numerator and the denominator, the same thing to the top and bottom. And you'll notice here that that was the example that we just did, right? We had 3/4 and 6/8 being equivalent using pictures. Now here's how you do it using math. Okay, so with equivalent fractions, if you're just asked to find an equivalent fraction, which your textbook does ask you for your lesson today, you just have to pick a number to either multiply both the numerator and denominator by, or divide the numerator and the denominator by. So that's equivalent fractions. Now, a concept that's very, very similar to that is the concept of simplest form. It's very connected to equivalent fractions because what you're going to be doing is creating an equivalent fraction, but the idea is to take a fraction and make the numbers as small as possible, keeping in mind that you have to do the same thing to the numerator and the denominator. All right, so here we have 8/12. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to take that 8 and 12 and make those numbers smaller. So you kind of have to do a little bit of thinking in your head of what could I divide both 8 and 12 by. When you're going for simplest form, you're always dividing. You want to make the numbers smaller while keeping the fraction equivalent. Okay, so you might take a look at both of those numbers and think, well, they're both even. You can always divide even numbers by 2. So you might think to yourself, I'm going to divide both of those numbers by 2. We end up getting 4/6. Now, those are equivalent fractions. Okay, so you've done that part of it right. However, 4/6 is actually not yet in simplest form because we can continue dividing both 4 and 6 by the same number to make them even smaller. So if you ever run into a situation like this where you can keep dividing, you can just keep dividing. So you notice, well, I've got 2 even numbers again. I can divide both of them by 2, and we end up with 2/3. Now, you may, instead of just starting with a 2, is really think about your multiplication facts. Those are going to be really, really important for this unit. Your multiplication, your division facts, and you may notice right away that you can divide both 8 and 12 by 4. So what you can do is you can bypass this middle step by thinking about maybe larger numbers that you can divide both your numerator and your denominator by. So if you can look at that fraction and right away think to yourself, well, I can divide both 8 and 12 by 4, you can skip that middle step and go straight to 2/3. Okay, both of these strategies will work. It's a little bit easier on you if you can think of the bigger number, but in coming lessons, we're going to do some more work on that. But for now, this is enough for you to know in terms of finding simplest form. So you're dividing the numerator and the denominator until they can be divided no more. So 2/3, we can't divide 2 and 3 by any whole number anymore. We have to stop there. There's nothing else we can do. Those are the smallest numbers possible. All right, then a couple of things yet to finish this up. In your work today, you're going to be asked to look at some pictures that might confuse you a little bit. You'll be given something that looks kind of like this, and you'll be asked to write a fraction for that shape. Now, if the shape, I'll just do a quick drawing here. Oh, maybe I should have switched colors. Well, it's okay. I think we can figure it out. If you were given a shape like this, where you had 4 equal blocks and 2 of them were colored in, it would be very easy to look at that shape and think to yourself, well, that would be 2 pieces out of 4, or in simplest form, 1/2, right? You can do 2 divided by 2 to get 1 and 4 divided by 2 to get 2, okay? But it gets more complicated when you have a shape like this, because our pieces are not the same size, okay? So what you actually have to do is, in your mind, please don't draw in your textbook, in your mind, you have to split this overall larger shape into more pieces, okay? So if this box right here is being split in half, what you should do is split this box in half, okay? Then split this box, then split this box. Now what we have is, like, think of it like a chocolate bar, split into equal pieces, which allows us to write it as a fraction, okay? So now instead of having different size pieces, we have all equal sized pieces, and I have 3 of them that are colored in out of 8, okay? So just a bit of a hint for the first few questions in your lesson that you're going to have to do in your textbooks. You kind of have to think a little bit outside the box for that one. And then the last thing, my last slide for you here, is just a note, because we are going to be doing a lot of this stuff on the computer online. When you write your fractions in your notebook, you probably will be writing them like this. That's, I'm guessing, the way that you were taught to write them. That's how your textbook quite often writes them. But on the computer, computers have a harder time formatting fractions to look like this, like what you are used to. And you will see them written like this. So like when I type in, for instance, in the answer key, this is what the fraction is going to look like on your computer screen, but it means the exact same thing. It still means 2/3. So that's just something to be aware of for tomorrow, and also for the rest of these online lessons. That is what your fractions are going to look like on Teams.